I'm going to show you timing. It's pretty easy, but I know some people get a little bit concerned with it. Definitely have your workshop manual, but outside of that, it's fairly simple. You're going to want to get yourself the installing and removal kit. There's no other way to do it right. You see some guys get out their deadbolt hammer and pound on these things, which is a very, very bad idea. The gear is threaded down in the, I don't know if you can, yeah, you can kind of see that, but the gear is threaded, and so then your tool threads on and it holds it, and then you'll thread your installer over the cam gear, and then that will allow you to draw the gear onto the camshaft, so that way you're not beating up the bushing, because what happens is people hammer these things and then it destroys that lipped edge of the cam bushing. It's super annoying. You see it all the time. Get yourself the proper tools, do it right. They have two different inner diameters for the intake and the exhaust ones. But get your Woodruff keys installed, and then install the installing tool. It sounds redundant. I have a special tool for locking the cam gears in place, but essentially it's just a pinion gear. It's the exact same size, teeth, the whole deal. So what I like to recommend is do your cam gears first, and using the idler gear as a locking point, you'll put your pinion gear in to help lock in the cam gears. When you go to tighten up your pinion gear, you can use the balancing holes that try and put in the crank. Just stick a extension in there, and that will lock the crank in place, so then you can tighten down the pinion nut. So that way you can properly tighten down all of your hardware without damaging anything, because a lot of guys will stick like a washer or a penny or something in the gear. That's a really bad idea. It damages stuff. It puts a lot of stress on this idler shaft. It puts a lot of stress on the bushings. Don't do that. Just use your pinion gear and it works. I'll show you. So you've got your Woodruff key installed. You've got your drawbar, whatever you want to call it, installed. Find your timing mark, line that up with the Woodruff keyway there. So timing mark there, adjacent to it. You can pull the idler off now, just make it easier. So you can kind of feel, and then this one's actually going on pretty nicely. There, it got tight. And put your left hand nut on. Draw it on nice and even. So you can kind of tell when you've got it installed, because there's just a little bit of play in there. There's a lip that the cam's going to push against, or the cam's going to push against the cam gear, and that's kind of how you know it's seated. But you have just a little bit of spring left from the breather on the other side. If the tool doesn't want to come off, that's when you're gonna grab your idler. You can stick your pinion gear in there, and it will kind of help you hold it. Take that off. That off. Now we can go over, do the exhaust side. The threads are pretty fine on these, which is kind of silly, but just be kind of gentle running it on. So same deal, timing mark there, key there. Oh, push the. So you can kind of see how that works when you've got that pinion gear in there. When we go to tighten these down, it's going to lock itself in, which is very, very handy. Same exact way my special tool works, without putting any stress or anything on the bushings, the spindle. Like I said, I've seen guys will take like a washer or something and they'll stick it in there. Bad idea. Don't do that. Or like, oh, use a penny or whatever. Don't do that. Just don't. Just put your pinion on last. You can use it, and then when we do go to install it down here, we'll use the crank to hold everything in place to tighten that one down. So you can kind of work this all together. You can kind of see, maybe I've kind of marked the timing marks with a white paint pen. Might not pick up on the camera or not, but on your intermediate gear, idler gear, whatever you want to call it, these two dashes always ride on the pinion there. Then the exhaust always goes with the dot there, and then since this is a TR6, we're going to use this lower dash. So there's one for that tooth and one for that tooth, and we're going to use the lower one. So now that you've got those lined up, that one can just stay solo for right now. Put this up in there. Now we're going to install the nuts. Left hand thread. Snug those up. So now we're going to install the pinion gear, and there's the Woodruff keys installed. So we're going to line up those timing marks, find that Woodruff key. You don't have to leave this timing just because everything is free. So if you want to take that one out, you can spin those around all you want. Now that we've got everything tightened up, we'll just relocate when time comes. So if you want to install your pinion gear with a little bit more access to it, because sometimes these things can be snug, which is good, but you just got to make sure you have everything nice and lined up. The new Woodruff keys are usually pretty tight. So now you got your timing mark. We're gonna do this all over again. Okay, here. 2 dashes down, 2 dashes towards the intake, and the dot towards the exhaust. Slide it over. Make sure our bottom is lined up. Make sure we're using the bottom timing marks as the TR6. And boom. Lined up. Once you start spinning this engine, they're not going to line up again for I think 96 revolutions or something like that. So don't expect it to rotate and then all line back up again. It will have to spin a lot of times before you're going to see those timing marks line up again. So once you've made sure you're happy with the timing, just be good with it and don't expect to see it again. Just do it right the first time and everything should be okay. So now that we're going to put this on, this is standard thread. Once we go to tighten it, I'm just going to stick an extension in one of the balance holes in the crank flywheel, and that's what's going to keep this from rotating. Draw that pinion in the rest of the way. We'll probably have a little bit to go. This is what I'm talking about for sticking an extension in one of the balance holes. This one only has one hole, so this is the one I'm using. Sometimes they're deeper, which is nice, but that's what you want to use, and then it just kind of pushes against the case. You could stick a block or something in there if you want, but I've never had any issue using that to press against. And then you're just going to tighten them up, and it will draw that pinion gear the rest of the way home, and it will pull the crank towards the timing side direction.